A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi, Herman and Corn. We're into day 6 now of the joint Israeli-American campaign targeting Iran's threat to Israel and to US assets in the region. And I think that, there's a lot of fixation, and the reason that this had to happen now from Israel's perspective was clearly the nuclear threat. That is virtually existential and horror-inducing. But as we've talked in previous episodes, it's a mistake to characterize the Iranian threat purely by its nuclear warheads capabilities, regardless of whether it obtains that or not. It's displayed in this conflict and in previous rounds that it will use missiles with incredible re-entry speeds, whether they're technically hypersonic or not, and use cluster warheads as they used last night over Tel Aviv and previously over Jerusalem to indiscriminately target large population centers in Israel and target military bases in the US. So I think to some extent, this is my take, whether or not Iran actually has, how close it comes to getting that nuclear capability, that must be stopped. But it's kind of a separate point to the fact that they must be stopped anyway. And that is what the objective of the joint campaign is, to degrade this capability. And we've seen a decrease in fire from Iran as the Americans, and I have to say those of us in Israel, are extremely grateful. I'm certainly extremely grateful. I can't speak for an entire country, but personally, huge gratitude to President Trump and Admiral Cooper of CENTCOM and everyone working both behind the scenes planning this, because we've talked about the immense planning, and actually working on the ground to help Israel to degrade this. And we looked at kind of ballistic missiles and how they're being sent, and some of the geocoordinates for the very controversial Iranian sites are actually in the public domain, which I find kind of fascinating. SOAR Atlas, one project, was sharing the first satellite images of the bunker that was targeted in Tehran. And I thought it was really pretty crazy, even from an OSINT standpoint, that the 8-digit geocoords were available on Twitter just within 30 minutes of the strike. And I guess when you think about the satellite imagery capability that Israel and the US have both, you kind of feel like they're omnipotent, or that they have this constant eye in the sky. We talked about that before. They don't even need to rely upon revisits to actually get a feed. And I would have assumed that with that capability, Israel and the US know exactly where every single underground missile launch site is in Iran. But I'm going to go out on a limb based on what I've read and said that I don't believe that that is the case. Admiral Cooper said today in his remarks, the commander of CENTCOM, that the US he's talked about how far the missile capability has been degraded already, and saying that with air dominance in place, the US and Israel are in a position where they can just loiter. They can literally sit there, and the second a missile is launched, the thermal signature gives a pinpoint location for where the base is, and then send in ordnance to attack that. But of course, that's one limitation there, is that it's a reactive strategy. You have to wait until there's already a missile in the air to do that, potentially. Unless in some cases, and we've seen the Israeli Air Force releasing footage of exactly this, they're very, very quick. You catch the guys literally as they're loading it up on the dispatcher. But regardless of which technique is used, it seems credible that Iran actually has succeeded in creating some underground depots that have to date evaded the watch of intelligence, which is pretty interesting. So I'd love to ask Herman and Corn about the capabilities. And I will add the disclaimer that we talk about these topics and study them from the perspective of anti-proliferation of ballistic missiles. We talk about these topics because we we want to think from this war when it's over, and those of us who are just looking at this conflict from the outside, what are the challenges that we faced in pinpointing this program that was taking place, being developed over decades. So from that standpoint, the technical limitations are, I think, what we should focus our discussion on here. Um, an eye in the sky can see a lot in great detail what's happening in the ground, but it can't see into the ground. So what do you think are some of the factors that might explain how, even with these incredible aerial resources and satellite image capabilities, that Iran might have literally snuck these things into the ground? And needless to say, we're not talking about sneaking, putting a treasure trove into the earth. These are gigantic missiles, and I feel like it's hard to actually appreciate their size. I don't enjoy watching the Iranian propaganda on X. One thing I can say about viewing those videos that they post of their launches and the underground bunkers is you get to see how big these things are. They are massive, and in one of the waves they released, they showed a video of one of I think the Fatah 2 being wheeled out from an underground bunker, and that thing is it's a monster. So I'd imagine it's not exactly a kind of subtle thing to move something like that or the production for it under any patch of ground. But Iran is vast, mountainous, and if you kind of imagined a country that would be the perfect place, the perfect geography to tuck big things into little caverns, Iran is probably it. So Herman and Corn, the battle for detecting underground sensing in Iran, let's talk about it in today's episode of My Word Prompts.
Hi everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn, and it is a bit of a tense atmosphere here in Jerusalem today. We are currently in day 6 of this joint campaign between Israel and the United States, and honestly, you can feel the weight of it in the air. The streets are quieter than usual. The hum of the Iron Dome and the aero batteries is a constant reminder of the stakes, and everyone is glued to their screens. It's March 6th, 2026, and we are witnessing a level of kinetic activity that many hoped we would never see.
Herman Poppleberry here. You're right, Corn. It's a heavy time, but it is also a time where the strategic reality of the last few decades is finally being put to the ultimate test. Our housemate Daniel sent us a voice note earlier today that really cuts to the heart of what everyone in the intelligence community is scratching their heads about right now. He was looking at the live feeds from some of the open source intelligence accounts and noticed a glaring discrepancy. We see the strikes, we see the interceptions, but we are seeing very little of the actual launch infrastructure being neutralized on the Iranian side.
That's the core of it. Daniel was asking about the paradox of the transparent battlefield. We live in an era where you can go on your computer and see a 30-centimeter resolution image of almost any spot on Earth. Between companies like Maxar and Planet, and the classified birds the United States and Israel have up there, like the KH-11 or the OFEC-16, it feels like nothing should be a secret anymore. We can see a specific car parked in a driveway in Tehran, yet here we are, in the middle of a massive military operation. And these Iranian missile cities are still proving to be incredibly difficult to pin down. It's like they are fighting a ghost.
It's a compelling question because it challenges the assumption that more data always equals more clarity. We have talked about Iranian capabilities before, especially back in episode 918 when we looked at their solid fuel development and strategic depth. But the engineering and the sheer audacity behind how they have hidden these sites is on another level. It's not just about digging a hole in the ground. It's about a total integration of geology, counterintelligence, and what I like to call the orbital shell game. We are talking about a multi-layered defense that starts hundreds of meters above the actual missiles.
I love that term, the orbital shell game. And for those who remember episode 567, we dove into how AI is being used for satellite deception. Today, we are seeing those theories play out in the real world under the highest possible stakes. So the big question today is, how does a country hide a massive mountain-shaking missile infrastructure from the most advanced eyes in the sky ever created? Is this a failure of our intelligence technology, or is it a triumph of Iranian civil engineering?
Well, Corn, to understand the how, you first have to understand the where. When we talk about Iranian strategic depth, we are talking about the Zagros Mountains. This is not just a scenic backdrop for a postcard. It's a massive, jagged fortress of limestone and granite that runs for 1,500 kilometers. If you are an engineer looking to protect high-value assets from the United States Air Force or the Israeli Air Force, this is your best friend. The geology of the Zagros is unique because it features these massive, folded layers of rock that provide incredible structural integrity.
Right, because we aren't just talking about a couple of feet of dirt. I remember reading that some of these facilities are buried under 500 meters of solid rock. To give people a sense of scale, that's more than 1.5 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other, all made of solid rock. That's not just a bunker, that's a subterranean kingdom.
Precisely. And that rock is the primary reason why even the most advanced bunker busters struggle. People always bring up the GBU-57, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or the MOP. It's a 30,000-pound beast designed specifically for this. It's basically a giant steel dart filled with explosives, but even the MOP has its limits. It can punch through maybe 60 meters of reinforced concrete or a certain amount of rock, but 500 meters? That is simply physically impossible for a kinetic penetrator to reach. You could drop them all day, and you would just be scratching the surface of the mountain. The energy required to displace that much granite is beyond anything in a conventional or even a tactical nuclear arsenal without causing a literal earthquake.
So, if the satellites know the facility is somewhere in that mountain, but they can't hit it, that's one thing. But Daniel's point was also about the hiding part. How do you even get the stuff in there without being seen? Every time you dig a tunnel, you create an enormous amount of waste. You have thousands of tons of rock and dirt, which we call spoil, that has to go somewhere. In a desert or a mountainous region, a fresh pile of bright, excavated rock sticks out like a neon sign on a satellite image. It's like a signal saying, hey, we are digging a secret base here.
That's one of the most difficult logistical hurdles in clandestine construction. If you look at the history of secret bases, the spoil pile is usually the smoking gun. But the Iranians have been very clever about it. One technique they use is co-locating these sites with legitimate civilian infrastructure. If you have a massive dam project or a government-sanctioned mine nearby, you can blend your secret excavation into the existing industrial footprint. You mix your secret tunnel spoil with the debris from a legitimate highway project or a limestone quarry. To a satellite analyst looking at change detection over months or years, it just looks like a very busy, very messy construction site. They use what we call ghost construction, where the visible work is a cover for the subterranean work.
And that's where the counterintelligence comes in. If you can convince the world that you are just building a new hydroelectric plant or a railway tunnel, you can move thousands of trucks in and out without raising too many red flags. But it's not just the dirt, right? There's also the heat. These facilities are not just cold caves. They have thousands of people working in them, massive electrical grids, and missile engines that need testing or maintenance. All of that generates heat. And in the world of modern surveillance, heat is a snitch.
You're hitting on a vital point, Corn. Thermal signatures are often the smoking gun for underground facilities. In a cold mountain environment, a vent blowing out warm air from a 1,000-man barracks or a server room shows up as a bright white spot on an infrared satellite sensor. To counter this, the Iranians have developed some pretty sophisticated heat exchange systems. Instead of just venting hot air directly into the atmosphere, they run it through long underground cooling tunnels or dissipate the heat into subterranean aquifers. By the time the air actually reaches the surface, its temperature has been normalized to match the surrounding rock. They are essentially using the mountain as a giant heat sink.
That's incredible. It's essentially stealth technology but applied to an entire mountain range. It makes me think about the limitations of things like ground-penetrating radar or GPR. I think a lot of people have this misconception that satellites can just look through the Earth like an X-ray machine. They watch movies and think we can see the missiles sitting in their racks deep underground. But that's not how it works at all, is it?
Not even close. GPR is a fantastic tool, but physics is a harsh mistress. High-frequency radar gives you great resolution, but can only penetrate a few meters. Low-frequency radar can go deeper, maybe 30 or 40 meters in very dry soil, but as you go deeper, your resolution drops off a cliff. You might see a blur that indicates a density change, but you aren't going to see a missile on a rail car. And when you are talking about hundreds of meters of mineral-rich rock, satellite-based GPR is essentially useless. It can't see through the mountain. The dielectric constant of the rock layers in the Zagros is so high that the radar signal just bounces off or gets absorbed long before it reaches anything interesting.
So we have the geological hardening, we have the thermal masking, and we have the logistical deception for the spoil piles. But then there's the launch itself. These are called missile cities for a reason. They aren't just warehouses. They are launch platforms. We have seen those IRGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, videos where they have these long rows of missiles on what look like automated rail systems. It looks like something out of a science fiction movie.
The rail-based system is a total game changer for their survival doctrine. In the old days, you had a static silo. Once the enemy found the coordinates of that silo, it was a sitting duck, but a missile city is a labyrinth. You have miles of interconnected tunnels. A missile can be moved from a storage area to a launch point 5 miles away, all while remaining under 500 meters of rock. They use automated magazines, which are essentially giant carousels for missiles. They can rotate a fresh missile into the launch position in minutes.
And the launch points themselves are designed for what they call pop-up capability. They don't just leave the doors open. They have these heavily camouflaged hatches, often built into the side of a cliff or hidden under a fake building. They open the hatch, roll the missile out, fire it, and then the launcher retracts back into the mountain in a matter of minutes. It's the ultimate shoot and scoot, but the scooting happens vertically and horizontally behind hundreds of feet of granite.
That's the thing. By the time an Israeli or American satellite detects the thermal plume of the launch and slews its cameras to that position, the launcher is already gone. It's back behind a blast door that can withstand a near miss from a nuclear weapon. This creates a massive problem for what we call the kill chain. The kill chain is the process of finding a target, fixing its location, tracking it, and then destroying it. With these missile cities, the Iranians have essentially broken the kill chain at the find and fix stages. If you can't see where the missile came from until after it's gone, and you can't see where the launcher went, your ability to retaliate is severely limited.
It's a sobering thought, especially given the current conflict. We are seeing these barrages coming out of Iran, and even with the incredible work being done with the Arrow and David Sling systems, the sheer volume is a testament to how much they have managed to stockpile in these hidden sites. It makes you realize that the air dominance we are used to, where the United States and Israel can just loiter over a country and pick off targets at will, it doesn't apply in the same way here. We are fighting an enemy that has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this scenario.
You're right to bring up the political and strategic angle. This is why the Trump administration was so focused on maximum pressure, and why the current joint campaign is taking such a multifaceted approach. You can't just bomb your way through this problem. It requires a combination of cyber warfare, sabotage, and the human factor. If you can't break the mountain, you have to break the systems inside the mountain or the people running them.
Let's talk about that human factor. We often get caught up in the high-tech stuff, the satellites and the AI. But in many ways, the only way to truly map these facilities is through old-fashioned human intelligence, or HUMINT. You need someone on the ground who knows which tunnel leads where, or someone in the procurement office who knows why the government just bought 10,000 tons of high-grade ventilation equipment or specialized rail tracks.
HUMINT is the ultimate tiebreaker. You can have all the imagery in the world, but without context, it's just a bunch of pixels. The problem is, Iran is an incredibly difficult environment for human intelligence. The IRGC is paranoid, and for good reason. They have seen what happened to their nuclear program with things like Stuxnet and the assassination of Fakhrizadeh. They have created a culture of extreme compartmentalization. The guy driving the truck full of dirt doesn't know where the tunnel goes, and the guy installing the electronics doesn't know which mountain he is in. They use a ring of steel around the Aerospace Force personnel. They live in closed cities, their communications are monitored, and their families are effectively hostages to their loyalty.
It reminds me of the old Cold War stories about Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, or the Soviet sites in the Urals, like Mount Yamantau. But those were massive, centralized hubs. What Iran has done is decentralized the whole thing. They have dozens of these sites scattered all over the country. If you take out one, you have only scratched the surface. It's a strategy of strategic depth that is designed to survive a first strike and ensure retaliatory capability. It's the definition of a second strike deterrent.
And that brings us to the doctrine of ambiguity. By showing just enough of these missile cities on television, they create a deterrent effect. They want us to know they exist, but they don't want us to know exactly where they are or how many there are. It's a psychological game as much as a physical one. They are saying, you might be able to see our cities and our bases, but you can't see our teeth. And that uncertainty is what prevents a full-scale preemptive strike. If you aren't 100% sure you can take out their retaliatory capability, you are much less likely to pull the trigger.
It's a very different kind of warfare than what we saw in the First Gulf War, or even in the early stages of the war in Ukraine. In those conflicts, mobile launchers were the big threat, the Scuds hiding in the desert, or the HIMARS moving through the forests. But those were still on the surface. They had to come out to play. These missile cities are a permanent, subterranean presence. They are part of the geography itself.
It also forces a shift in how we think about regional stability. If Israel knows that a significant portion of Iran's missile force is essentially invulnerable to conventional airstrikes, it changes the calculus for preemptive action. It pushes the conflict into the shadows, into the cyber realm, and into the kind of high-stakes sabotage we have seen over the last few years. This is why we see things like mysterious explosions at industrial sites or cyber attacks on the Iranian power grid. If you can't hit the missile, you hit the electricity that powers the rail system.
I want to go back to the technical side for a second. We mentioned AI-driven change detection. This is something we touched on in episode 567, but I think it's worth expanding on here. Nowadays, we don't just have analysts looking at pictures. We have algorithms that are constantly scanning every square inch of the Iranian landscape, looking for the tiniest changes. A new tire track in the sand, a slight discoloration in the rock, a change in the vegetation near a hidden vent.
And that is exactly where the battle is being fought right now. It's an arms race between the hiders and the finders. For every new algorithm we develop to detect a hidden entrance, the Iranians develop a new way to mask it. They might use spectral matched camouflage that mimics the exact light reflective properties of the surrounding granite. They even use fake rocks made of fiberglass to cover ventilation shafts. Or they might use decoys. We saw this in the 2026 conflict footage from earlier this week, where the IAF, or Israeli Air Force, hit what looked like a massive bunker entrance, only to find out it was a hollow shell made of plywood and spray-painted concrete.
That's the orbital shell game in action. You make the enemy waste their most expensive munitions on worthless targets. When a single bunker buster bomb costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you only have a limited number of them in theater, every decoy you hit is a major victory for the defense. It's about exhausting the attacker's magazine and their political will.
It's also worth noting the evolution of their launch doctrine. They have moved away from the idea of launch and reload. In a high-intensity conflict, you might only get one chance to fire your volley before the area is swarmed by drones and loitering munitions. So, these missile cities are designed for massed, synchronized fire. They want to be able to launch 100 missiles in a 10-minute window and then disappear. They use what they call missile farms, where multiple hatches open simultaneously across a wide area, making it impossible for a single strike package to neutralize the threat.
Which is exactly what we saw last night over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The speed of the re-entry was terrifying. Whether they are technically hypersonic or just very fast ballistic missiles like the Khaibar Shekan, the challenge for the defense is immense. And the fact that those missiles came from a location that was likely untouched by the previous day's airstrikes is the ultimate proof of the effectiveness of this underground strategy. It shows that despite 6 days of intense bombing, the core of their deterrence remains intact.
It really highlights the limitations of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR. We have this hubris that technology has solved the problem of the fog of war. We think that because we have 40K resolution and AI, we have total situational awareness. But what Iran has shown is that you can use the oldest trick in the book, hiding in a cave, and combine it with modern engineering to create a problem that our most advanced technology still can't fully solve. It's a humbling reminder of the power of physical hardening.
So, for our listeners who are following the news and looking at these OSINT, or open source intelligence, reports on Twitter or X, what should they be looking for? If the satellites can't see the missiles, what are the telltale signs that an analyst can actually latch onto? How do we, as civilians, make sense of the information coming out?
You have to look for the secondary and tertiary effects. Don't look for the door, look for the road that leads to nowhere. Look for an unusual concentration of high voltage power lines ending at a mountain face. Look for the movement of heavy machinery that doesn't match the stated purpose of a civilian project. For example, if you see specialized tunneling equipment being moved to a remote area that is supposedly just a farm, that's a red flag. Also, look at the water. These facilities need a lot of water for cooling and for the people inside. If you see a new pipeline going into a mountain with no visible town on the other side, you found something.
And the ventilation is still a big one, right? Even with heat exchangers, you still need to move a lot of air. You can't have thousands of people breathing in a closed mountain without a massive air exchange system.
You look for patterns in the mountain itself. Are there areas where the snow melts faster? Is there a particular spot where the vegetation is slightly more lush because of the moisture in the exhaust air? These are the tiny granular details that the AI algorithms are getting better at spotting. But again, the Iranians know this. They might put their vents inside an existing building, like a fake warehouse, or even underwater in a nearby lake or river to completely mask the thermal plume.
It really is a game of cat and mouse on a continental scale, and it makes you realize that the intelligence game is never really over. It's a constant process of adaptation. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me today is that we need to be humble about what our technology can do. We have these incredible tools, but the human brain on the other side is just as motivated and just as clever. They're using our own technology against us by knowing exactly what our satellites are looking for, and then giving them a false narrative to follow.
That's a very realistic worldview. We should never underestimate our adversaries. The Iranian regime is many things, but they are not stupid. They have had 40 years to think about how to survive a war with the West, and they have used that time to turn their geography into their greatest weapon. They have integrated their military infrastructure into the very crust of the earth.
It also emphasizes why the alliance between the United States and Israel is so critical. We share the data, we share the technology, and we share the expertise. The joint campaign we are seeing now is the culmination of decades of cooperation. Our boys in the IAF and the American pilots in the Mediterranean are working off a common operating picture that is the result of thousands of hours of painstaking analysis. It's not just about the pilots in the cockpits, it's about the thousands of analysts in windowless rooms in Tel Aviv and Virginia who are trying to solve this puzzle.
And let's not forget the role of the Abraham Accords and our regional partners. Having more eyes and ears in the region, more places to base our ISR assets, it all adds up. The more angles you could look at a problem from, the more likely you are to find that one tiny flaw in the deception. Maybe a satellite from one angle sees nothing, but a high-altitude drone from another angle catches a glint of light off a ventilation fan.
So, looking forward, do you think AI is eventually going to win this battle? Are we going to get to a point where no amount of rock or camouflage can hide a missile city? Or are we entering an era where the subterranean world becomes the only safe place for a military to exist?
I think we are moving toward a world of total transparency, but we aren't there yet. As AI gets better at detecting patterns, the counter-AI techniques will also get better. We might see things like generative adversarial networks, or GANs, being used by the Iranians to design camouflage that is specifically designed to fool our detection algorithms. It will be a battle of the bots in a way, one AI trying to hide a mountain, and another AI trying to find it.
A battle of the boats. That sounds like a future episode for sure, but for now, the reality on the ground here in Jerusalem is very much human. We are watching the skies, we are listening to the sirens, and we are hoping that the intelligence we do have is enough to keep us safe. It's a reminder that technology is just a tool, and at the end of the day, it's the intent and the strategy behind the tool that matters.
Well said, Korn. It's a reminder that behind all the technical talk of overburden and thermal signatures, there are real people whose lives depend on getting this right. The goal of the joint campaign is to degrade these capabilities to the point where they are no longer an existential threat, but it's a long and difficult road. We are not just fighting a military, we are fighting a geological and engineering masterpiece.
It really is, and I think we have covered a lot of ground today, from the geology of the Zagros Mountains to the intricacies of heat dissipation and the psychological impact of strategic depth. It's a complex topic, but I hope this helps our listeners understand why the news reports they are seeing are often so vague about the actual targets being hit in Iran. When the news says a military site was targeted, they might be hitting a mountain that looks completely unchanged on the surface, but inside, a vital piece of the machine has been broken.
Precisely. When you hear that a target was hit, but there is no visual confirmation of the damage, it's often because the target is buried so deep that the only way to know if you were successful is through secondary intelligence, like intercepted communications or seismic data.
Seismic data. That's another one. If you drop a massive bomb on a mountain, you can actually measure the shock wave to see if it hit an empty space or solid rock. It's like using the Earth itself as a diagnostic tool.
We are using every tool in the shed. It's a compelling time to be an analyst, even if it's a terrifying time to be a resident of the Middle East. We are seeing the absolute limits of conventional warfare being tested against the absolute limits of defensive engineering.
Well, Herman, I think that's a good place to wrap up our core discussion. But before we go, I want to make sure we give our listeners some practical takeaways. If you are someone who follows this stuff, don't just look at the flashy satellite photos. Look for the logistics. Look for the patterns of movement. Remember that satellite imagery is only about 20% of the puzzle. The rest is found in the data, the signals, and the human stories. And most importantly, remember that what you see is often only a small fraction of what is actually there.
And if you want to dive deeper into the history of these programs, I highly recommend checking out our archives at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered the Iranian missile program in detail in episodes 918 and 697, and for more on the Israeli perspective, episode 718 on the Jericho program is a must-listen. It provides a great contrast to what we discussed today.
We really appreciate Daniel sending in that prompt. It was a timely one, and it gave us a lot to chew on. If you're enjoying the show and finding these deep dives helpful, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and allows us to keep doing this collaboration. We know there are a lot of voices out there right now, and we appreciate you choosing ours.
It really does make a difference. We see every review, and we appreciate the support from our community. We have been doing this for 978 episodes now, and it's the engagement from you guys that keeps us going, even in times as tense as these. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking those tough questions. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com and on all your favorite podcast platforms.
Peace out, everyone. Stay safe.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue.